Hello, everybody. Hello, colleagues. Hello, community members, allies, and guests. And welcome to the LGBTQ plus and ally Employee Resource Group, ERG keynote session, working towards a more inclusive environment, transgender and non-binary participants in clinical research. My name is Mary McGuire, and I have the distinct honor of representing the executive team on this ERG and working with an absolutely amazing group of people, people on this ERG, members of the ERG, and people who come in and come out of the various events that we have. The passion and compassion of everyone I have met during my time with this ERG has simply taken my breath away. I have been an ally, a fierce ally for decades and decades, ever since I first got into the pharmaceutical industry. And one of my first clinical trials was on AZT. And I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry during the AIDS epidemic and everything that was associated with that time, which we got a little taste of during the pandemic. But there was a lot of confusion and fear and misinformation, and we didn't even have the internet then. But it was a time for me where science was strong, where clinical research was very strong, and I think probably helped lead society out of that sort of dark time in our past. We have really gone so far in the past 30 years and more. I know sometimes it's hard to understand that, but we have. And I want everybody to keep the faith and keep the hope alive. And by joining this ERG, that is something that keeps the hope and faith alive. Join as a member. This is attend the events. It's a very compassionate group. It's a safe place. If you're a community member, if you're an ally, if you want to know more, it's a safe place to learn. So I really want to encourage you to join this ERG as a member. I would like to read you a quote from Chris Fickrey, our CEO, to start us off. In order for Clario to be successful, we must do everything we can to attract and retain the best people in the industry. Part of creating that environment is maintaining a workplace where our colleagues, you and I, can operate to the best of their ability without concerns about how race, gender, or their sexual orientation might be perceived. We believe that Clario is a safe place, but recognize that we can all do better, and we can all always do better. The LGBTQ plus Employee Resource Group is an important organization in not only helping our colleagues build a community within Clario, but in helping the broader organization understand how all of us can be more supportive of the community. Additionally, we need to help our clients and investigator sites identify and recruit a diverse population for our studies. It is absolutely necessary if we are to achieve our goals of helping bring the best possible therapies to market. There is much more work to do on this front to understand how we can make a meaningful contribution. I thank all of you for your efforts on these topics, and more importantly, for the contributions you make every day to Clario, our clients, and our patients. These are wonderful sentiments for our CEO in this quote, and I know that they are extremely heartfelt. I will turn this meeting now back to our host, Liam.
All right. Jay, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jay Bailey. I use they, them, their pronouns. I have been in the clinical field for only a year as a worker, but about 13 years as a patron. So I'm definitely seasoned in the clinical field. And I am happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liam Pascal. My pronouns are he, him, his. I've actually been working with clinical research organization for just about 2 years now. Before that, I was in telecom and technology. And I'm actually not in the clinical research area of the business. I handle the leadership training, but I'm also a consultant for trans inclusion and a patient and a participant. So I've got some lived experiences I can certainly share as a transgender man. So happy to be here with all of you. And I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So there's a lot of terminology. I think Jay and I both would agree that it's ever changing, it's complex, and when it comes to the trans and non-binary communities, it's very extensive. So staying informed is essential to showing respect and understanding of our community. So we're going to go through some key terms here momentarily, but I want to be sure that all of you understand that educating yourself is truly important because language can vary geographically, regionally, within different communities. And it really does help to foster inclusivity and enable you to communicate with our community with empathy and respect by doing so. So diversity in clinical trials. Jay, did you want to speak to this a little bit before I get started here?
Not particularly.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's think about it this way. So if you think about diversity in clinical trials like a puzzle, it's got all these different pieces, right? So just as a completed puzzle requires every single piece to form that whole picture, diverse representation in clinical trials really ensures that research findings accurately reflect the broader population. So when we include individuals from diverse backgrounds, as you see here on the screen, we can sort of piece together a more robust and inclusive understanding of how medical interventions and treatments really affect various populations. All right, let's talk about this wonderful thing called equity and health equity. Right? I'm sure many people have seen the image of the people on the boxes trying to see over the fence, right? For a long time, we talked about the equality one, which was all about, equality is about everybody getting the same thing. And equity, of course, is about fit and ensuring that people get what they need to be successful and what's best for them, as you see in the images here. So if you think about being in a classroom, for example, everybody in that room gets a pair of shoes. Well, that's an example of equality because everybody got the exact same thing, right? But the reality is that we don't all have the same size feet, right? So if everybody's given a size 7 shoe, the likelihood that those shoes would fit everybody is very slim. Equity means giving everybody a pair of shoes that actually fit them in their specific size. So we want to ensure that equity comes before we can ever ensure equality. So very important as we talk about health equity here. And so why do we need health equity, right? It values everyone equally with focused and ongoing efforts to address avoidable inequalities. And we're going to talk about some of those inequalities today. Really acknowledging the historical and contemporary injustices that we've seen, overcoming economic, social, all these other obstacles that we see in the health industry and clinical trial industry, and of course, eliminating any preventable health disparities that we have as well. Excuse me. All right, Jay, I don't want to do all the talking, so please let me know if you want to jump in here and I'll turn it over to you for a moment.
Do you want me to read this one?
Please feel free and I'll jump in if I need to.
Inclusion in clinical research is the representative involvement and empowerment of diverse populations in all aspects of the enterprise, which is like, we want to include everybody that has all different backgrounds, no matter if they have any disabilities, if they're trans, if they're non-binary, if they have any sort of all inclusion. And an inclusive environment promotes all of those values. Like inclusive environments makes you feel safe, makes you feel like you are included, makes you feel like you have a safe space to be the way that you are, no matter what it is.
Fantastic. We're going to talk about how we can go about being inclusive, creating those safe spaces for the trans and non-binary communities as we go through. So how do we start to do that? Well, first of all, I mentioned key terms. Can we go to the next slide? Now, we're certainly not going to read everything on this slide here, but just want you to have a good, simple understanding of some of these key terms. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list that you're going to see on this slide and the next, but it does give you a really good understanding of some of the more common terms that we used. As I mentioned when I started the presentation, I am a transgender man. That is this huge umbrella term for someone's gender identity or expression that is different from the sex I was assigned at birth, for example. So I was assigned female at birth. I'm a transgender man, and it has nothing to do with someone's sexual orientation. So very important to remember that. They're two very distinct things. You can see the definition for non-binary here, as well as cisgender. Now, I will tell you that there are some people who get offended by the term cisgender. They considered it to be a derogatory term. It is not. It refers to someone who identifies as the same gender they were assigned at birth. There's nothing derogatory about the term. It is just to describe that kind of person. All right. You see here gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and sexual orientation. Now, gender identity is really one's psychological sense of self, right? Whether they're man, woman, neither, or combination of the two, right? And unlike gender expression, when you think about gender expression, we think about clothing, hairstyles, the way we walk, the way we carry ourselves, certain outward characteristics that we may show that could be masculine, feminine, somewhere in between, right? Or neither. And then, of course, sex assigned at birth, I talked about earlier, that is the sex that you are given at birth, based on external anatomy that the doctor may see as well. And we want to be sure we understand that it's not just male, female, it's also intersex, right? And there are just about, I would say, the same number of people with red hair. It's about the same number of people that are intersex in the US, right? Sexual orientation is all about emotional, romantic, outward sexual attraction to someone else, right? Whether it's man, woman, both. And it really refers to a person's sense of personal and social identity based on who they're attracted to. And it doesn't mean just physical attraction. It could be romantic attraction, emotional attraction. So various types of sexual orientation there as well. It's extremely important when we think about clinical trials and the way that we approach conversations with transgender and non-binary individuals, that we understand that these things are very different, right? Even though they are related, they are not the same. Okay. Next slide. So let's get into why we are here. What are some of the challenges and the barriers, some of the things that we experience when it comes to including transgender and non-binary people in clinical research, in clinical trials? Next slide. So I'll start us off here, and Jay, please let me know if you want to jump in. We obviously face very unique challenges and barriers. I would say a lot of ours are very unique because other people don't typically experience them. There's a huge lack of provider knowledge. And what I mean by that is many healthcare providers have very limited, some have no understanding of transgender and non-binary healthcare needs, which of course can lead to inadequate care or discrimination or both, right? Some insurance policies that are out there, a lot of them actually, have historically excluded transgender and non-binary patients, right? Making it very difficult for us to access treatments, procedures that we may need. And of course, affordability is another thing. In our community, there's a lot of being unemployed or underemployed because of discrimination and bias. And the cost of gender affirming care alone can be substantial, especially if you don't have the correct insurance. There are legal barriers in place. I'm sure many of you have heard about the anti-trans legislation that we are seeing creep up across the US. I think right now there are over 550 anti-trans, or actually LGBTQ bills, with the most of them targeting the trans community. So there are some legal barriers in place that we are now dealing with that we didn't deal with before. And Jay, did you want to add anything here before I continue?
From my own personal standpoint, I definitely see, like, in my job, and I'm actually starting to start up meetings to educate nurses and the providers in my job about gender affirming care. Because I know that most of them only see their patients for maybe 15 minutes tops, and it's quick to just not have that personal rapport with them and just to write it off as I only see them for 5 minutes. Why does this matter? And it's in that 5 minutes, this person is looking for care from you and they want to feel safe from the person that is trying to treat them. So I am actually starting to start up meetings just so we can go through exactly what we're going through here, the challenges that we may face, because even just being called out by a dead name that you see in a chart, just being had that being set out in a waiting room really like stops your heart a little bit. It really is just like, oh, I'm here for help, but I don't feel safe anymore. So I definitely I'm trying my best to get that out there in my own field at least.
Thank you, Jay. And let's talk about dead naming for a moment. If you've never heard the term, dead naming is when you actually use someone's name that they no longer use, right? So when I started my transition, I changed my name because I'm a trans man, and I certainly did not want the name I previously was assigned at birth, right? So if you use someone's dead name or their former name, that can be very hurtful, very harmful. Misgendering someone using incorrect pronouns. I will tell you that those types of things have a very long-lasting, very negative impact on us, especially our mental health. I went last year actually to have an outpatient procedure done, but I had to be put to sleep to have it done. And before I had this procedure done, I asked my primary care provider, listen, please make sure that you send me to someone who has treated trans patients before and they're knowledgeable in transgender medicine, and that, I know will be inclusive. And so she sent me to this person. I got there and walked in. We went through all the paperwork and had a conversation. And she came back and talked to me before they were going to take me back to the operating room. Now, anyone who knows, anybody who's ever had any type of surgery understands how scary it is to have any type of procedure where you are put under, right? So she comes in and talks to me, and I said, listen, I know you saw in my chart that I'm a transgender man. My pronouns are he, him. My name is Liam. But I want you to understand that I have had gender affirming top surgery. I have not had gender affirming bottom surgery. And I want everybody to be aware and make sure that they're calling me by the correct pronouns and using my correct name. And she assured me everything was good. No worries. They take me back to the operating room. They put me on the table. I'm literally lying there with the sheet over me and nothing else. And the nurse comes in, anesthesiologist comes in, and the nurse, I can hear her right as the anesthesiologist is about to put me under. And she uses her pronouns. I immediately wanted to jump off the table and run out of there. I felt so uncomfortable. I felt unseen, unheard, like no one really cared. I had just had the conversation, was assured that would not happen. So those types of things that happen to us in healthcare situations, they oftentimes will prevent us from participating in clinical trials, for example, because we don't want to go through that again, right? We want to feel safe. And we need knowledgeable healthcare providers who have been through the appropriate training and ongoing education to make sure that they know how to treat us with the most compassionate care. Next slide. So one thing I want to point out, and I've talked to a lot of different trans and non-binary folks that are in groups with me, and safety and privacy are just as important to our community as inclusion, believe it or not. Because if we get outed to the wrong person, including a family member, right, that could mean homelessness, job loss, inability to gain employment, and unfortunately, sometimes even death. And when we're looking at these challenges and barriers to trial participation, there's no regulatory guidance, right? Even in the latest guidelines provided by the FDA, I think the term gender identity is mentioned twice. And they've said they're just not going to approach it right now. They don't have anything to include right now on that particular topic. There's traditional structures that we see of studies. They're done through a cisgender lens, right? Templates we use for protocols, for informed consent documents, and data that we collect are designed in ways that really fail to address our specific needs and the demographics of our community. Jay, did you want to add something here as well?
It, in my own world, for me being a participant, it's really is it's challenging to see, to have like the intake forms in healthcare have be so cut and dry. They're very even if you do put down a preferred name, there's nothing else to, there's nowhere to put that. And with insurances and stuff, a lot of insurances don't even allow that, because this is your government name, it has to be attached to this government name, we're not going to bill it, or you have to pay out of pocket if you don't have this particularly done. And I think that there definitely needs to be some reform on that. It's crazy that there's only mentioned twice, because we've been around for a long time. I don't see how this is a new thing.
No, not at all. It's not a new thing. You know, and I think, you know, Jay would agree, we already have to have a lot of appointments when it comes to care, right? Depending on how we transition, right? You can transition socially, legally, medically, a combination of the three, or, you know, none of those things. It's really based on an individual and what they want to do, how they wish to transition. But if we are failing to collect information about gender identity, that means that there are some diseases, some conditions, some risk factors that could be a significant problem in our community that we're not aware of. So if we're only asking for name and sex assigned at birth, we're missing the opportunity to learn about interventions or treatments that have how they have different safety or efficacy in trans patients, which really could inform, you know, individual decisions and public health efforts. So for example, someone like me, a transgender man assigned female at birth, I can still have what's considered female diseases like endometriosis, for example, that are often misdiagnosed. And transgender women who were born male may still require regular screening for prostate cancer. So see, these are some of the things that we want people to understand when we say trials are designed and developed through a cisgender lens, right? Inclusion criteria such as men with prostate cancer or women with ovarian cancer, that's going to exclude women and non-binary people with prostate cancer and men and non-binary people with ovarian cancer, respectively, right? Make sense?
Also comes down to POC, non-binaries, and transgenders as well. That as a POC queer, that in general is overlooked, brushed under the covers. It's definitely a different point that also needs to have some light shined on it as well.
100%. 100%. That intersectionality piece is very, very important. And I think you probably have all heard and seen that, you know, people of color, the Black community in general, in terms of the transgender community, is definitely at a distinct disadvantage compared to white people in our community. And so it's important when we think about the socioeconomic aspect, the location, the geographic location, and the discrimination and bias that tends to be ongoing in the community. The one thing I will say is that we've seen a lot of people in the past year, people of color, who have been killed because of hate crimes, because they were trans or non-binary. And a lot of those go unreported. So that is something, these are the types of things that are top of mind for us when we're considering participating in a clinical trial, going to a doctor, right? I think there's about 1.6 million people that are trans in the United States. And I think I read an article last year that maybe 400,000 would be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. So 1.6 million, 400,000 of us may be diagnosed with cancer in our lifetime. And yet, right, we experience systemic oppression, violence, discrimination in medical settings all the time. All these factors and others obviously are going to lead to things like cancer not being diagnosed, or we're not being able to participate in trials where there are interventions and treatments that could potentially help us with the cancer we have been diagnosed with. So it's very important to keep that in mind as we think about clinical trials as a whole. All right, Jay, did you want to kick us off here? I don't want to talk the whole time.
The trust and safety. I'm big on this. I fight so hard for my clients, especially younger clients, because I work with children, and as I go along throughout the generations, they definitely are coming out younger, which I wish I had that gumption when I was a kid, but I want them to have a safe space in order, and the lack of trust in doctors is very prevalent. They need to have different protocols for certain people, just like they would for a disabled person. You'd have different protocols. You would have different protocols for a trans person, a non-binary person, or even somebody that's just questioning right now. They just want to feel safe in that setting that they might not feel safe at home as well. Study materials and trials. There is a lot of trials that aren't inclusive of the trans community. And I want to be that voice that it definitely holds that for that, because I want there to be, because we have a lot of, I guess, PTSD from like the past too, because there's been clinical trials that we've just been used as basically like lab rats for, where we're being tested and stuff. So we want to have that be a safe space that we're just like, this is a good place for you to put your opinion out and for us to learn from that. Privacy concerns. We want to make sure that people, that what they are giving, they're trusting us with their basically their life. They're trusting us with this information, and they want us to be able to trust that and to keep that that trust going. If they tell us, just like Liam said, if they tell us that I'm a trans man, I go by these pronouns, and this may look different, but this is how I identify. We want to make sure that we're not going back and just saying, oh, that looked a little different than I thought it was. I'm going to just go based off what society has told me that this is. I don't know much else to say.
You know, there's horror stories that I hear and see all the time, that bring me back to this lack of trust in doctors and staff. In 1995, I remember there was actually a trans woman who was in a car accident, and when the paramedics showed up, they of course were trying to tend to this person, and they ended up removing the clothes, and they started mocking this trans woman because they had male genitalia. And so instead of treating this person like they should have and providing the compassionate care that she needed, they continued to stand there and mock her. And so when she finally did make it to the hospital, she laid on a bed there. No one really came to her to treat her, really helped her at all, and she ended up dying. And this happens more than you know. We have people going to doctors all the time, and doctors will say, well, I don't treat trans people. And because of some of the legislation we're seeing right now, there are places where doctors can actually say, based on my own personal beliefs, my religious beliefs, whatever the case may be, I refuse to treat you. I refuse to see you. Go somewhere else. This is where, again, we're having that severe lack of trust in the doctors and staff, not only because they're not properly trained, but because a lot of them just don't care or want to treat us. When you think about things like the study materials that we're using, if we're not seeing ourselves represented in this material, whether it be digital marketing, things that you send us in the mail, if we're not seeing people that look like us, as well as images of couples that consist of maybe two men or two women, for example, if we're not seeing gender neutral terminology, we're not going to feel safe. We're not going to feel like we're included, and we're probably not going to participate. One of the things that I notice a lot is when I get a text message sometimes about a clinical trial, and I'm like, okay, great. Let me look at this. This might be something I want to participate in. As soon as I start to open it up, to click those boxes, if the only thing that I see is sex assigned at birth or male, female, just those two check boxes, I immediately am done. I shut it down and I send an email to the folks that sent me that clinical trial and say, I don't feel like I should be included in this because I'm not represented. So it's very important that we keep that in mind when we're thinking about our study materials, our protocols, our informed consent documents, all of the data collection that we do. We have to make sure it is 100% inclusive of every individual person, right? Including trans and non-binary patients. Next slide. Let's talk about restrooms for a minute. This is a big one for me, and Jay, I'm sure it is for people that you know as well, right? There's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, anti-trans legislation that we are hearing about being introduced, being passed, and some of that legislation has to do with restrooms. So there are states, for example, that if I were to go into a men's restroom and someone assumed that they don't even have to know, they can assume that I'm trans or non-binary and ask me to leave the restroom. And if I choose not to do that, I can be arrested and put in jail. Now, that doesn't even go into the fear that a lot of us have when we're out and about using public restrooms. And I bring that up because when we're thinking about medical care or participating in a clinical trial, if we actually get to the point where we go to a site, we want to see gender neutral or all gender restrooms and shower facilities. Why? Because that helps us feel safe. We know we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be harassed. We're not going to be asked inappropriate questions, right?
Out of the
Yep.
10, I think it is, bathrooms in my facility, there's only 2 that are non-gendered. And there's ones that I have to use that say female restroom, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable just opening up that door. I don't enjoy that as a participant, and I'm sure that other people don't enjoy that either, because when I tell them, oh, there's the women's bathroom, and they kind of shudder, and I'm like, that's all we have, and we don't have anything else. And I apologize, I wish we did. And it's kind of ridiculous. I have to go like all the way around the building to just use a non-gendered bathroom.
And that's the thing that I think just boggles my mind is we just want to use the restroom, right? We're not there to have conversation. We're not there to do anything but use the restroom. The other thing that's really important for us, in addition to the gender neutral or all gender restrooms and having enough of those, is really the entire site staff, not just a doctor or whomever's going to be, treating us, but everybody at that site, from the person who speaks to us in the very beginning. We need for people to offer their names and their pronouns and allow us to do the same, right? Hi, my name is Liam. I go by he, him, his pronouns, or I use he, him, his pronouns. If you don't mind sharing your name and your pronouns, that'd be great, right? Giving people the option to share their pronouns with you. If you're sharing yours, chances are they're going to share theirs. They're going to feel comfortable. They're going to feel safe in doing so. And if you start to do that on a regular basis, it becomes no longer a thing that you're not used to. It gets to that point where you're now comfortable with doing that on a regular basis. So if you're not doing that already, I would highly recommend that to be a common practice that you begin doing.
I just want to touch on also parents. There's transgender parents as well. And if they have their kid with them and they want to go change their kid and they go into the men's bathroom and there's no changing areas for their child, that's also a whole different discrimination to me. It is. I'm feeling as a person, and my child can't get taken care of just because I am going to what I find the correct bathroom, but also the state or whatever, this facility didn't allow me to have a changing area either.
I think Jay, we can both agree we have to get away from all these societal norms, right? The people that like to have the big celebrations when they're about to have a child, right? The pink and the blue, the men's clothing, the women's clothing. We've got to get away from the societal norms that we've all become accustomed to, and understand that in order to be truly inclusive, we really have to be using more inclusive language, more gender neutral language, and really make people feel like they belong.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
Next slide. I mentioned earlier about the FDA coming out with guidelines last year, but again, they did not address gender identity. I think it was a footnote and it wasn't really addressing the trans and non-binary communities. And, this is one of the big challenges that we have, is really wanting to make sure that we're included in these guidelines, and we're not yet. The legal implications, I talked about those a little bit earlier. They're becoming more and more now with the legislation that we're seeing, the bathrooms, the way that we dress. In some places, we could get arrested for dressing in what someone considers to be not our, gender, the way that we're supposed to be dressed, right? The appropriate gender. If I dress like this with this shirt on in certain states, somebody can say to me, you're not supposed to be wearing that, right? There's bans on access to our gender affirming care. I'm one of those people who did decide to transition medically. So I take gender affirming hormone therapy, testosterone injections every week. There are places where that's being banned. We're being turned away because we're trans or non-binary, and we're not being offered medical treatment. All of these things are weighing heavily right here, right? And when we have to deal with all these things and it impacts our mental health, we tend to stay away from clinical trials because they're not a necessity, not for us, because we don't see us represented there, right? And there's nothing for us without us. And I want to say one more thing here before I turn it over to Jay for any additional thoughts. Between January 2018 and February 2022, or July 2022, excuse me, there were just over 141,000 published articles of clinical trials participation of trans and non-binary patients. Now, you know how many of those actually reported barriers to inclusion in clinical trials based on trans and non-binary patients? 48 reported barriers. And in those particular published articles, 107, only 107 mentioned participation of trans or non-binary patients. Well, why is that? Well, either because the right questions were not asked, so those individuals didn't identify themselves properly, or they didn't participate because some of these barriers we talked about. So 0.08% of the articles on clinical trials reported participation of trans and non-binary patients. That is really sad.
I would like to talk about like in the jail and prison systems as well.
Sure.
The trans woman goes into the system and they put her in a male correctional space, and that's just an opposite as well. I've watched things where trans men have been going into the women's facilities as well, and now they're uncomfortable, and then they're getting even more discriminated against because, like, obviously Clear is a man, but they're assigned sex at birth as a female, so they're put in there. That could lead to a lot of different things too. Obviously, in general, that is a traumatizing thing, but then to be physically hurt, mentally hurt, and also you just feel like out of space. Like I don't even, it sucks to be here, but I also don't even belong in this part of it. And it can also go down to the legal aspects of the trans bills, but also the abortion bills. There's, if something happens, unfortunately, and they are assigned male at birth but have female reproductive systems, they could get pregnant. If something happened, if they were raped, or if anything happened within their jail system. And then it's a whole other thing too, because there's also the abortion bills that are going on top of the trans bills, and it's just a sandwich of bad time. And yeah, I believe that there needs to definitely be but it also comes down to their representation too. As somebody that is trans, I would want somebody that has that kind of education in that. To have just a cis white man be my representative, I don't think he's going to represent me as well as I would want to. So it comes down to that too.
It's interesting that, Jay, that you bring up the whole thing about the abortion bans, and the ability for obviously trans men like myself, if I've not had a hysterectomy or anything like that, I could easily get pregnant. And if I go to participate in a clinical trial and all you have for me to choose from is male, female, I'm going to choose male if I choose to do it, right? If I probably won't do it, but if I do, I'm going to choose male, right? So you're going to go ahead and potentially put me in that clinical trial. and had no idea that I could very well be pregnant because you didn't ask the right questions. Again, it goes back to, nothing for us without us. And it's very important that we think about all these things as we're talking about what we need to be including in not only our marketing materials, but our forms, right? Our protocols, our collection forms. Next slide. Well, how do we get there? How do we walk this path together and try to make sure that we are creating inclusive, safe spaces for all patients, including the trans and non-binary community? Well, first of all, we want people, including especially healthcare providers and clinicians, to live by not the golden rule, but the platinum rule. Treat us like we want to be treated. Right? Not like you want to be treated, like we want to be treated. We are motivated, we're going to be motivated to participate in clinical trials that are led or staffed by transgender researchers, right? People of color. When we see people who represent us, chances are we're going to be more inclined to at least look into the possibility of participating, right? We want resources that address financial barriers. Again, I talked about earlier, a lot of us are unemployed or underemployed, uninsured or underinsured. People from our community tend to like to be paid for trials. I mean, it's just that simple, right? And we want to make sure, I would love to know that if I went to see my endocrinologist, whom I have to see once a quarter based on my gender affirming hormone treatment that I take, I would love for her to be the one telling me about clinical trials that I should be participating in. Let's integrate those into healthcare and get those recommended by the people that we trust, right? The doctors that we're seeing for our transgender care. We got to move away from these forms that just are asking for male, female. The National Institutes of Health last year actually put out a nice long report on what needed to be done to make sure that we're collecting the right data. And we need to be, at the very least, collecting SOGI, SOGI data, sexual orientation, gender identity, right? Very important. It's a very common scenario that the patient filling out that traditional gender question on the form was assigned female at birth, but now identifies as male, transgender, or neither male or female, non-binary, right? So in this scenario, the binary choices that we're giving them, male or female, under gender on a demographic form are exclusive, and they create a very uncomfortable situation for the patients. If we start asking people to separately identify sex assigned at birth and gender, that's going to improve the overall measurement quality and allow researchers and other data users to identify individuals with trans experience by comparing their sex assigned at birth to their current gender identity. It's a two-step process. And a lot of people think, well, this is something that's a little bit harder to do. It's really not, right? We've been talking about this for a very long time, and now it's important that we start taking some action, right? Anything to add, Jay?
I think just applying that action too, because like it's kind of like if the intake form does have a preferred name and it's not being used, then what's the point?
Exactly.
Like, what is the point of you putting this out there, making me seem like this is going to be a thing and then not even being done? We need to apply as well. We need to put action and apply that action.
Yeah. Reaching out and talking to folks in the medical industry who have been trained, who are experts in working with trans patients. That's another thing that would benefit greatly from, right? Conversations with those individuals. It's really incumbent upon the clinical trial industry to build what I call as broad a tent as possible, right? A patient should really be asked about their sex assigned at birth, including, there should be designations for male, female, intersex. There should be options for gender identity, sexual orientation. And really important to keep in mind is that safety and privacy thing I talked about earlier, right? Some people, some participants may not want to give you that information. So there needs to be places where they can either write in their response, or there needs to be a box that says choose not to disclose. So really important that we allow those options as well. That's part of being inclusive and not exclusive. If we're giving them a multitude of choices and we're allowing them to write in or refuse to answer certain things, that again tells our community that, hey, we've thought about you in designing this particular trial, and we want to make sure that you have the ability to answer, what you want to answer and not answer what you don't. Right?
Absolutely.
Next slide. Few things I want to point out here. I talked about earlier, reaching out to medical doctors who have experience with the trans and non-binary community, but also partnering with some of your local and national trans organizations. There are so many of them out there. If you need a list, I'm happy to share. If you reach out to me, I can do that. But I think we definitely need to be partnering with some of our local and national organizations and really finding out from those people, hey, what do we need to be doing to be more inclusive of our trans and non-binary communities? What do you suggest? What are you looking for? We need to make sure that everybody who is working at the sites, keep an open mind, right? Avoid judgment of people, no assumptions. We as human beings have a tendency to look at someone and automatically try to assume that it's a male, what color they are, where they're from, ethnicity, the whole 9 yards. And you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, right? Ongoing staff training. It doesn't stop at just one training and then that's it. And it preferably needs to be done by someone from the community, or at the very least, another medical provider who specializes in trans medicine. Trying to avoid gender-specific language as much as possible. And again, going back to those restrooms, gender neutral or all gender restrooms and shower facilities, very, very important in creating an environment where we feel safe, right? Small modifications, they don't need to be major. We can get there, but we have to take steps to get there, right? Small modifications to clinical protocols, to informed consent documents, data collection forms, can greatly improve the way we analyze data so we can better understand and address the healthcare needs of the trans community, as well as making more studies welcoming and inclusive so that, anybody who's a member of the community feels comfortable participating. That's the part that is really important to us. We have to feel comfortable. We have to feel seen, heard, and valued, and we have to feel safe. Otherwise, we are not going to participate in a clinical trial because it's just not something that we feel is a necessity for us. It's not doing anything for us.
And that's like consistently too. You want, like you said, you don't want to just do one training or one thing one time consistently, because there's so much to learn too. You can't just pack it all into one. And there's so many things so many different facets that you would want to touch on, that it would just open up a broader aspect of things in people's minds and just be like, wow, I didn't realize that was even a thing, because I just knew like the basics of things, but there's so much more to learn, and one time is not enough. Consistently training, consistently teaching, consistently learning.
Exactly. And, one thing I want to point out here, because I every time I do a training on any type of, how to be an ally, or why do we need inclusion, those types of things, I get asked a lot, especially by people who really want to be allies. Well, what if I make a mistake? What if I slip up and say the wrong thing? Or what if I have a question, but I'm afraid to ask? And I'm going to speak for myself here, and Jay, feel free to jump in, but I think I'm speaking for, I would say, the majority of our community when I say this. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. What we want you to do is to care enough to try.
Absolutely. That's what I tell my parents all the time.
Yep. You just care enough to try. And guess what? If you make a mistake, admit it and don't do it again. Don't repeat it. I would rather, even in a healthcare facility, a clinical site, I would rather someone say to me, hey, Liam, I don't know a lot about transgender folks. So I might have a lot more questions than what you're used to getting. But I want to learn. So if you'll bear with me, I'd really like for you to help me learn. That to me says that person cares. They want to learn. They want me to help them in a way that I feel safe, and that they're providing me with the most passionate, compassionate care that they can possibly provide, because they do care. That in and of itself is key. I think we're about to move on to, only got a few minutes left here. These are some additional resources that we thought would be really important to share with all of you. There's some glossaries here of terms that are ever changing again, and these sites actually do a really good job of keeping theirs up to date. But yeah, you can certainly reach out if you have any questions about these resources, but these are some excellent resources to take a look at when you have some time. Now, I guess we're going to open it up for questions.
Yes, Liam and Jay, thank you so much. Incredibly informative, and we so much appreciate you folks also sharing, personal experiences, but experiences from others in your communities as well. If anybody has additional questions to submit, please do send them through. There are a couple that we've received. And just in case anyone didn't join at the beginning, my name is Betosh Bahadur, and I'm with CISCRP. So there's a couple of questions. One of them that we're going to get into is about EKGs, and this individual is saying, there are algorithms that are programmed into the EKG machine that require male or female due to differences in electrical activity that are not yet deeply understood. And I think, the question here is, what do we do? Even if a trial is set up to support trans people, they'll be asked this question when it comes time to the EKG. Is it ever okay to ask about sex assigned at birth?
I think it's always okay to ask about sex assigned at birth, but you also have to make sure that you're asking the other questions, the gender identity, the sexual orientation, and finding out those answers to those questions as well. The one thing that I will say here about the EKG, you're absolutely right about that, because I can tell you from talking with my own endocrinologist and my hematologist, as well as my primary care doctor, for folks that are on gender affirming hormone treatment, specifically, I'll speak for myself as it relates to testosterone injections. Some doctors look for you to be on this gender affirming hormone treatment for a period of time before they start to look at your lab results, for example, as that of a biological male, male assigned at birth, right? So yes, you are going to have those situations where a transgender man, for example, maybe who's not taking into any gender affirming hormone treatment, or one that is, they're going to have different results. And the problem is right now, we don't know what we don't know, because we have not had enough participation and inclusion in clinical trials. This is another reason why we're wanting to be included and have the option to self-identify in these forms, because if we do that and we start to figure out what is, how this particular treatment or this particular drug interacts with gender affirming hormone treatment, for example, or some type of procedure that someone from our community may have, it will start to answer some of these questions, like the questions about the EKG that you have. That's kind of where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Liam. And I would say, some of this is just communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you asking me this?
Yep.
Why is it important? And this is just a situation that exists. So I think this individual posed the question. You did a good job of sort of explaining, well, there's a lot that we don't know about yet.
And I think it's perfectly fine to say is, there's a lot that we don't know, and here's why we're doing this, because we want to know, right? We want to be able to help, and we want to be able to be, to be able to tell you how this, X affects Y, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing that as much as possible. As long as you're genuine and you literally are having conversations to better understand, that's what we're looking for.
I'd rather you ask than assume.
Yep. Don't ever assume.
Excellent point. Excellent point. A lot of folks are asking some variation of what can I do? What is the one change that you'd like to see? What is the one small action that we can take? So I sort of just want to put that out there for Liam and Jay, both of you, to just give your perspective. Is there one particular thing that folks can do? Or, are all these actions things? I mean, from my perspective, all the actions that you've mentioned are things that you can go ahead and start to advocate for and implement in trials. So please do. The floor is yours.
In my personal aspect, and I do this too. I just talking about it even when the person's not in front of you, holding down their pronouns, even if somebody says, "Oh, he said," well, she said. It's not rude to do that. It's just to put it in their mind when people do that, because I had to do that before I even came out as non-binary. I had non-binary friends, and I would have a friend that if I would say she accidentally, he'd be like they. I would correct myself and then keep it moving. That's my thing, is just correct yourself and keep it moving, but also to educate those that are around you. I work in a setting where I have people all around me and they talk on the phone, and we have non-binary counselors that I have in my clinic. So when I hear, oh yeah, she'll call you back, I just go to them and I say, they go by they, them pronouns. So in the next call, if you do have this, please be mindful, please do this, or just honestly just correct and be like, they, them. Just in that moment, if they're speaking to you, if they say he, it's she, just, well, she said actually, not he said actually. It's one of those things just to keep it in the close, even if they're not in front of you, if it's at home, if it's at work, just keep holding those, and just, it's defending people. It's defending people. I tell my parents all the time, even if I'm not in the room, I would love for you to just continue on with they, even though I know that you know me as your daughter, I need you to keep that on as they, even if I'm not in the room.
I would say, similar to what Batash said, everything is uber important, right? We'd love to see all of these things happen, right? But beyond anything else, the only way that we're going to get to be able to do all of these other things is to keep an open mind and make sure that even when we're not in these healthcare settings, these clinical trial settings, we are being as inclusive as possible. We're using the right pronouns, we're using their right names, we're introducing ourselves with our name and pronouns. Something as simple, and you may not even think about this, something as simple as wearing a pride pin tells other people that they are safe with you. Tells people in our community, you can trust me, right? And being able to be okay and be a little uncomfortable at times, speaking up for people in our community when you hear something or you see something that's wrong, right? If you make a mistake, you admit it, you don't repeat it, but don't beat yourself up for it. We all make mistakes. All we're asking is that you treat us like we want to be treated and understand that we are human beings like everyone else with the same hopes, dreams, wants, and needs as everybody. And we want the same compassionate care that everybody else wants.
I also think it's not pushing off younger folk. Like people are like, oh, they don't know what they want, or they don't know like anything. They're only 11. They don't know what this is. And it's just like, why not respect what they can learn later on down the line? That's not what they want, but this is what they want now. This is what they are wanting to be called now. And you should respect that. Absolutely.
So we're just about at the end, but Liam, I think there's one more question, and Jay, you absolutely could answer this too. That is probably important. When you spoke about being reached out for potential participation in a study, but you found out right at the beginning the intake forms were exclusionary. When you responded back with your feedback, with your input about these exclusionary forms and processes, did you receive any response back? Did you get any feedback about that?
From one particular location, I did. From the other one, I did not. And from the one that did reach back out to me, they thanked me for calling it out. And they did let me know that they were actually in the process of updating everything on their end. Now, I have not received anything from them since, but I was at least pleased to hear that they cared enough to respond and let me know what they were doing to correct what I had pointed out to them. That meant a lot. Sure.
And Jay, did you have any experience or thoughts on that? When you do tell a provider or tell a trial site or a clinic, hey, exclusionary practices is what I'm seeing here. Do you receive any feedback? Have you received feedback?
I've received pretty good feedback. I actually just had I got a new program director at my job, and I've been noticing a lot of the nurses and the providers falling off the wagon a little bit with the pronouns and stuff as they come along. Because school's out, more kids are going to be coming in, and I was speaking to her. It kind of made me a little nervous, a little bit, but as I was speaking and just her acknowledging it and saying, "Oh, absolutely, I've already actually started to think about this," I was like, "Wow, this is amazing." So to be heard in that aspect was really nice. I left feeling a lot less nervous than when I walked in. So it was a good feedback. I asked her about it, and now we are starting on those meetings that I was talking about literally this week. So it turned out pretty well, which I'm very happy about. And I hope that it goes beyond. I hope that they take it even from this job. I hope they take it to their next job and the next job after that. And I hope they take it home. I hope they educate their families. And if they have somebody in their life that does follow under these things, I hope that they treat them with a little bit more compassion after knowing these things.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you both so much. This has been such a wonderful educational experience. And I think, you know, what's important here, right, is that it's not just the education that you've received today, and now it's the actions that move forward. And I really appreciated, Liam, you saying, you know, you're here. Folks can reach out. They, you know, if they have questions, and I'm sure, Jay, you're also open to it. I think that's the point here, right, is this is it's going to be continued work in this area is needed, and there are allies and folks that can help you figure this out. And so with that, I'll just pass it back over to you folks to close it out with any final thoughts that you might have. Liam or Jay? Mary?
Just thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I will say that every time I get to do something like this, I think after it's done, how many hearts and minds I might have been able to open just a little bit more. And at the end of the day, regardless of your position, whether you are involved in clinical trials, some type of healthcare or not, even in your daily lives, just try to be as inclusive as you possibly can, and know that at the end of the day, if you don't have an answer to something, it's okay. And it's okay to ask as long as you're respectful and you're professional. We want people to learn, right? We want people to ask us questions, but we also want people to do their own research and come to us with information that they've learned to share with us. But just do your best to try to accept being comfortable with the uncomfortableness of some things. Some of this stuff is new. We're not used to it because of societal norms. And I think we have to understand that in order to get where we need to be, which is making sure that we're always putting patients first, all patients first, we have to be more inclusive and start to really understand each other in order to do that.
I agree with every
Go
single.
ahead, Jay.
I was just saying, I agree.
Well,
I
thank
know
you,
we're way past time. I
everybody.
just wanted to help close this out from the Clario side. And Mary, if you want to say something too, feel free. But I just want to thank everybody for joining today, for giving their time to learn and listen. Liam and Jay, thank you so much for the presentations you delivered. They were incredible and really impactful to hear your stories. So if you have any questions about joining Clario's LGBTQ+ Allies ERG, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Mary or Rosie, and we can help connect you. Mary, if you have a final thought, please.
That was exactly my plug. Someone asked, what can we do? Well, first thing to do, please join this ERG here at Clario. Please work with all of these fabulous people that I've been working with this year, and please attend events and just join, just talk, just share. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.